Hello everyone and welcome back to another 4D Systems project. Today I'm going to show you how you can make touch interactive projects using only code in Workshop 4's Designer environment. Let's get started and take a look at how this works. In a previous tutorial, we had a look at how to draw simple shapes onto the display using pure code in the Designer environment in Workshop 4. So things like circles, rectangles, and lines, all drawn directly in 4DGL without using widgets or any kind of drag and drop interface like the ones that you would find in Visi or VisiGenie. That video was really focused on the fundamentals, understanding how the coordinate system works, how shapes are drawn, and how we can animate them using loops and variables. But today I want to take what we learned in that tutorial a step further. Instead of just drawing shapes or animating them, we're going to make them interactive using touch. The example that I'm going to be showing you the code for is this ripple effect. Whenever the screen is touched, it generates expanding circles that animate outward and disappear once they reach the edge of the display or the boundary that I set. And if you drag your finger across the screen, you get a trail of these ripple effects following your movement. For this example, I'll be using a Gen 4 ulcd 50DCT display, as well as a Gen 4 UPA breakout board. So as always, I'm going to launch Workshop 4, set up a new project, find my display, and today I'll be working in the Designer environment. And now we can start coding. So before we get into animation or touch logic, I'm going to start at the top of the code and set everything up properly. The first thing I'm defining here is a set of constants. This includes things like the screen width and height, the height of the header at the top, the maximum number of ripples we allow at once, and the spacing of the grid. The reason I'm using constants here instead of just typing numbers directly into the code is because it makes everything much easier to manage. If I want to change the look of the interface later, for example, increase the grid spacing, or change how many ripples can exist, I only need to change it in one place. I'm also defining all of my colors here. This makes the code a lot more readable, especially as the project gets bigger and more complex. Right after that, I declare all of my variables. This is where things start to differ quite a bit from the previous video. Before, we were only dealing with maybe one or two shapes at a time. But now, I need to manage multiple ripples simultaneously. So instead of single variables, I'm using arrays. Each ripple has its own X and Y position, radius, previous radius, lifetime, and an active state. So you can think of it like this. Each ripple is its own little object, and we're storing all of those values in parallel arrays. That allows us to update and draw multiple ripples independently, all within the same loop. I also declare some variables for touch input, things like the touch state, the current X and Y position, the previous touch position, and a few flags like whether this is the first touch or whether touch is currently active. These are really important because they allow us to control when ripples are created and how they behave when the user moves their finger across the screen. Now that the setup is done, I'm going to move on to the ripple logic. All it does is loop through every ripple slot and reset all the values back to 0. So when the program starts, there are no active ripples and everything is clean. Next, I'm going to create the function that actually adds the ripple. So whenever the screen is touched, this function looks through all the ripple slots and finds one that isn't currently active. Once it finds one, it assigns the touch position, sets a small starting radius, and marks it as active. And that's it, the ripple is now a part of the system. Something important here is what happens when all the ripple slots are already being used. Instead of just doing nothing or crashing, the code simply reuses one of the existing slots so the system always keeps running smoothly, no matter how many ripples are being created. I've also added a helper function that checks how far the touch has moved. This might seem like a small detail, but it makes a huge difference visually. Without this, a ripple would spawn for every single frame while your finger is moving, which would completely flood the screen and slow down the display. So instead, I only create a new ripple when the touch has moved a certain distance from the previous position. This gives a much cleaner and more controlled trail effect. Next up, I'm going to move on to the background. So before we draw any ripples, we need to set up the background. This function clears the screen, fills it with a background color, draws a header bar at the top, adds some text, and then draws a grid across the rest of the display. I also add brighter center lines to give it more of a UI or system-like feel. Then, instead of clearing the entire screen every frame, I'm only redrawing small patches of the screen where something has changed. So if a ripple expands, I only redraw the area behind that ripple. This makes the animation much smoother and also much more efficient. I've also added a crosshair that follows the touch position. So whenever the user is touching the screen, there's a clear visual indicator showing exactly where that input is happening. Next, let's take a look at how the touch interaction works. Inside the main loop, I'm constantly reading the touch state and position. If the screen is being pressed or dragged across, I mark touch as active. If it's the first touch, I immediately create a ripple. After that, as the finger moves, I only create new ripples when the movement passes that distance threshold that we set earlier. So instead of a continuous stream, you get these clean bursts that follow your movement. Each frame follows a consistent structure. First, I erase any previous visuals, things like old ripple positions or the previous crosshair. Then I read the current touch input. After that, I update all the ripple data, things like their radius and lifetime. And finally, I draw everything again in its updated state. So the key idea here is clear the previous frame, update your logic, then draw the new frame. At the very end, I add a short pause. This just slows things down slightly so the animation appears smooth and readable instead of updating too quickly. And that is the last bit of code required for this project. The other examples that I showed, like the constellation or particle burst, are pretty much the same setup, just with different results. This just shows you how you can reuse a base code to achieve different things if you take a little bit longer setting up the file. So overall, this project is a great example of how you can take simple shape drawing and turn it into something fully interactive. We're still using the same basic graphic functions, but now we're combining them with touch input, arrays, and structured updates to create something much more dynamic. And once you understand this structure, you can start building your own interactive interfaces, visual effects, or even full UI systems directly in Designer. If you'd like to take a look at the display products used in this video, please visit our website. And of course, subscribe and stay tuned for more tutorials. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.